Hello friends, welcome back. I'm so happy to be in conversation with you once again. In this video, we shall take a look at a paradox. A paradox, as we know, is a seemingly absurd or contradictory statement, which, when investigated a little deeper, may prove to be well-founded or true. I'll be talking about the so-called Hispanic paradox. And this video may well force you to take a more holistic view of health. When I use the term Hispanic in this video, it refers to the Mexican Spanish-speaking population of immigrants in the United States of America. But once the video is over, you will realize that the knowledge and information of this can easily be transferred to other nationalities, countries or communities as well. Albert Einstein is reported to have famously said that the only mistake in life is the lesson not learned. The Hispanic paradox can teach us a few lessons for India, and we shall see how. For a nation that is on the rise, we need to have a healthy nation. And as you will discover, health is not just about bigger and better hospitals and more medicines. The secret to health and long life is simply being yourself. We shall begin by asking ourselves a very simple question. What are the things that pose risk to health? The most common ones that we are told or which we feel are low income, because low income results in poor living conditions, poor access to medical facilities, and poor nutrition. Next, we might think it is low level of education, because this results in restricting people to low-income jobs. And with low-income jobs, the attendant problems mentioned above naturally follow. Or it could be lack of health insurance, because it may prevent a person from getting good quality medical aid when it is most needed. And today's times, some lifestyle related disorders such as diabetes or excess weight also has its attendant problems. So, low income, low education level, lack of health insurance, diabetes and excess weight apparently appear to be a surefire formula for ill health and suffering. Let's see how this actually pans out. What could be a better way of confirming that formula for ill health which we just talked about a while ago, if all these factors affect a person or a particular community? And of course, the second requirement would be how well have these conditions been studied? The United States of America offers an ideal ground for study because it has tremendous diversity. It has diversity in terms of race, color, ethnicity, age, income disparities, immigration, legal and illegal, both, and gender, as well as lifestyle choices such as being an LGBTQ community person. And to top it all, the most important factor is that the US data is pretty well documented as well as accessible. The Hispanic population provides a very large sample of the population for a study. If we consider ethnicity, it is seen that back in 1960s, most of the first generation immigrants were from Europe. They came from Poland, United Kingdom, Germany, and Italy. 40 years later, at the dawn of the 21st century, majority or the largest dominating figures for immigrants is from across the border in Mexico. And of course, the remaining are from Cuba, India, Philippines, and China. So as you can see in the graphic, Mexican immigrants form a dominant part of the population today. And that is the reason why they have captured the interests of medical specialists, epidemiologists, and doctors. Hispanic immigrants are relatively poor. their median income is almost $12,000 less than the national average. We are talking about the annual income. And if we look at the poverty rate in the next graphic, we find that the poverty rate is twice as high as whites and is only lower than the blacks. The poverty rate for Asians and whites is around 7.3%, whereas for Hispanics it is more than double at 15.7. Also, the Hispanic population is nearly 20%, or 1 out of every 5 persons in the United States is of Mexican origin. If you look at this particular bar chart, you will find that the population of whites is actually decreasing. From 63.7%, it has decreased over the last 10 years to 57.8%. Whereas the share of population of Hispanics has gone up from 16.3% to 18.7%. By contrast, the population of blacks is relatively stable, albeit having come down by 1 percentage point. That means from 12.2% to 12.1%. Let us now look at the unemployment rate. And even here, the Hispanics are just below the blacks, while the whites and Asians are just a little over 4%. Hispanics are closer to 7%. Let us now take a look at a sample graph which plots the deaths for females for every 100,000 of population between the age group of 45 to 64. What we see out here is that Hispanic females in the US had a 24% lower risk of dying as compared to the non-Hispanic white female population. If you look at cancer deaths, once again, they are far lower than the corresponding numbers for non-Hispanic whites. While this graph is only for females, the graph for the males is quite similar. By now, I'm sure you must have seen the paradox. A population which is poorer, lesser educated, and have the least health insurance cover are in better health than those who are considered affluent, educated, and better covered by health insurance. The disadvantaged poor seem to be living longer despite what is considered risky for health. So obviously there's something wrong in the way we think about health risks. The death of a person between the age of 20 to 64 is considered as a premature death. Here is a bar graph of premature deaths for 2015 for every 100,000 of population. The number of women who died prematurely were 144 for every 100,000, while men were 219 for every 100,000. These blue boxes show the death rate for Latinos. Let us now compare it with the two other major ethnic populations, blacks, much higher, more than double, and whites. The bar graph speaks for itself. Once again, you'll notice that the paradox just does not extend to old age deaths. It also works for the more younger population who seem to be dying despite the poorer living conditions and being exposed to the so-called health risks mentioned earlier. Experts have been puzzled by this phenomenon over the course of many years. Why is it so? For many years, researchers and the medical establishment tried to explain this away by saying that the Hispanic immigrants would be going back to Mexico to die. They called this the salmon bias. Just like the fish salmon returns by swimming upstream to spawn, it was their contention that Latinos were returning to Mexico to die. As we shall see, this too is not a valid explanation. Another excuse made by people who were in denial of this paradox was that it was healthier people who migrated to the United States. Also, they alleged that death certificates did not record the details of death correctly. But these two research studies, published in the American Public Health Association journal, throw these two assumptions out of the window. This is one study published back in April 2010, and this is a still older study discarding the salmon bias and healthy immigrant hypothesis. The Hispanic paradox was observed in infant mortality also. In data that was analyzed for the years 1995 to 2000, covering more than 20 million births and 150,000 infant deaths. Taking data for first hour, first day and first week deaths and comparing them between different population groups. What they found was that it defied not only the salmon bias, because obviously the little babies did not go back to Mexico to die, but also the healthier immigrant theory, as well as the death certificate theory in which the data in death certificates was not appropriately entered. Let's now consider the immigration status. Mortality in infants born in the United States to Mexican immigrant mothers is about 10% lower than those experienced by infants of non-Hispanic white US-born mothers. Once again, confirming the Hispanic paradox. What all this means is that today we need a new model to explain health risk conditions. For one thing, labeling and clustering people into racial categories or even more vague labels such as disadvantaged, minority people, or people of color, which go by the acronym BIPOC, the BIPOC. What BIPOC stands for is Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. Really vague, unscientific, and it does not help us to really understand what are the factors that can assure citizenry of good health. Well, it doesn't end there. There is a twist to the Hispanic paradox. The protective effects of the Hispanic ethnicity diminishes with greater acculturation to the US culture. What exactly does this word acculturation mean? We shall just explore that in greater detail. Now, what do we understand by the term acculturation? Acculturation is another term for assimilation, a quality that is expected from every immigrant. The United States, and for that matter every country, has a distinct culture, which we can call as the core culture. In the United States, this core culture is made up of the values of the middle class, white, Protestant, Anglo-Saxon population. In order to climb the social ladder to become more prosperous, one needs to be admitted to the institutions of the core culture. These can include pubs, these can include celebration of festivals, language, accent, food, and so many other imponderables which cannot be measured by medical researchers. The process of acculturation causes acculturative stress and leads to ill health. Gradually, Hispanics lose the advantage of good health which they once had when they started off as immigrants. It may happen in a generation or two, or longer if they are able to preserve their original core cultural values, and yet if they are able to assimilate without compromising on their own cultural identity. Now, Let's get one thing straight. Acculturation is not a vague academic concept. In fact, it's not a linear measure either. It is actually bidimensional, which means it measures a person's immersion in the culture of origin versus its adaptation to the dominant culture where it is seeking refuge. It is measured with the help of a questionnaire, and it needs analysis from a person who is competent to do that. What matters to us is that acculturation leads to stress, and stress translates into poorer health outcomes. With assimilation comes the acceptance of the dominant community's culture, and the protective advantage that the original cultural identity provided wears off. Such stress points may come from the difference in heritage, historical for instance, due to differences in language, idiom, metaphor. It comes with food choice, and by food choice we also understand how food unites people of a single kind. It can be dress, it can be music, sports preferences, as well as family values. The last one is, of course, one of the most important things. In the name of globalization, there is an onslaught on the cultures across the world. It is affecting India in particular. The land of diversity is being reduced to a universal, septic, uniform culture from the West. And this is happening very insidiously. It starts with education, which is oriented towards making children forget one's culture, history, and identity. Universal media usage is leading to deculturalization in music, literature, and art. These are the very places where person finds expression to creativity and intellect. Food habits and local cuisines are being destroyed in the name of globalization. As a matter of fact, cooking at home is now considered old-fashioned and backward and outright anti-woman according to human rights activists. Family values are portrayed in the form of a divorced single-parent household where the food is ordered from Swiggy or Zomato. The language preference is English, and increasingly mother tongues are not being spoken at home. Customs and festivals have also acculturated. Take for example the recent Saint Valentine's Day. This was being celebrated here in India when it has already been removed from the general Roman calendar by the Roman Catholic Church back in 1969. And the reason that the church gave for removing this particular festival from the calendar was that it is very doubtful that a person by the name of Saint Valentine ever existed. We must take all these things into consideration because India is a very ancient country with a very rich ancient culture, and yet it is also the most youthful country in the world with the largest percentage of population in the employable age. What I'm telling you is not some fancy theory. It is very well understood, very well studied medical, social, and anthropological phenomenon. Does this augur well for the health of the country? Oh yes, most certainly it does. And what do we have to learn from the Hispanic paradox? The Hispanic paradox has been studied for many generations now in the United States. And what it tells us is that the best performance, the best health, and the greatest index of happiness can be achieved if people are still connected to their roots. The moment you try to adapt to a foreign system, you are going to create stress. And that stress is going to translate into many chronic diseases for which there is virtually no cure found as yet. Building hospitals, inventing new medicines is not the answer. The answer lies in awareness of doctors, psychologists, counselors, and parents. And it's really quite inexpensive. All we have to do is honor a person's culture, honor a person's accent, reduce the overburden of adaptation. So most of all, the curriculum of all these professionals needs to be adapted in order to make best use of the rich culture of India and the youthful energies. Let me just remind you about the medical conditions that can arise from continuous stress. For one thing, it suppresses the immune system. It leads to hypertension, that's high blood pressure, and heart disease. It has been shown that it is associated with cancer. It leads to constipation, IBS, hemorrhoids, obesity, diabetes, allergies, asthma, and a host of other things not mentioned here. This is page 1 of the references that have been used or referred to in the course of this video. This is the second slide of the references. Naturally, you can stop the video at any point of time, refer to these, and I encourage you to read the originals to form your own opinion. That's the last page of references. I will now summarize the main points in this video. We explored the Hispanic paradox and came to know why the poor are often healthier and live longer. We saw how acculturation leads to stress followed by disease. Then we saw the shortcomings of the present medical model, which needs to be changed. The areas of change that are required are particularly in the scope of medical curriculum and the outlook of doctors. Finally, we saw why this is important for India, and we also identified several areas where acculturation is taking place and taking its toll. We can become the finest nation if we are in the finest health. Only then the youthful energies of this nation can be put to the task of improving the conditions across the world. If India progresses, the world does better. So friends, that brings me to the end of this video. Thank you very much for your attention, and please like and share this video and also subscribe to the channel so that you can spread the wisdom far and wide and create a better educated world. Thank you, and bye-bye till we meet once again in yet another video.